The first time she told me she was never in the mood anymore, I believed her because I loved her. The 100th time, I believed her because the truth was starting to feel too humiliating to consider. Then one night, her search history cracked that whole story open, and I realized rejection had never been the part that was killing me. Her name was Melissa, and by the time all this started, we had been together a little over 4 years. We weren't married, but we had built the kind of life that makes people assume you're headed there. We shared an apartment, split bills, had grocery routines, favorite takeout spots, and that quiet couple rhythm where your lives start fitting together without much effort. I was 32, worked in logistics, and liked simple things staying simple. Melissa was 30, worked from home doing marketing for some skincare brand, and had this calm, polished way about her that made even stressful situations look manageable. For most of our relationship, things between us had felt easy. Not perfect. Just easy. We laughed a lot. We stayed up too late for no reason. We touched each other without thinking about it. Passing in the kitchen meant a hand on the lower back. Watching a movie meant her legs across mine. Going to bed meant feeling like I was climbing into the same life as someone who actually wanted me there. That part matters, because when things changed, they didn't change all at once. At first, it was just less. Less kissing. Less lingering. Less of that natural closeness you don't notice until it starts disappearing. She still hugged me, but more like habit than instinct. She still let me kiss her, but there was a difference between being allowed and being wanted, and after a while I could feel exactly which one it was. The bedroom changed too, just slowly enough for me to keep making excuses. She said she was tired. Then stressed. Then mentally overloaded. Then not feeling connected to her body lately. Every explanation sounded reasonable by itself. Work had been rough. Her sleep was off. She said her hormones might be weird. 1 month became 2. Then 3. I kept telling myself this was what being a good boyfriend looked like. Being patient. Not making her feel pressured. Not turning a temporary phase into some dramatic relationship problem. And every time I tried to bring it up carefully, she found a way to make me feel like I was asking for something selfish. Not in a cruel way. That was the thing. Melissa was never loud about it. She was calm. Controlled. She had this soft, measured tone that made everything sound mature and fair. She'd say she still loved me. She'd say it wasn't about me. She'd say she just wasn't in the mood anymore, like this whole part of life had simply gone dim for her and nobody was to blame. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because the other option was harder to sit with. If it wasn't stress, and it wasn't hormones, and it wasn't just a low period she'd come out of eventually, then what exactly was it? Was it me? My face, my body, my presence? Had I become too familiar? Too available? Too easy to ignore? Those thoughts started coming in late at night, usually when she had already turned away from me in bed. She didn't shove me off. She didn't act disgusted. That almost would have been easier. Instead, she gave me this steady, low-temperature rejection that never looked dramatic enough to fight, just painful enough to stay with me. If I touched her waist, she'd say she was tired. If I kissed her neck, she'd say her head hurt. If I tried to start anything more intentional, she'd tense up before gently saying she just wasn't there mentally. After a while, I stopped trying as often. Not because I didn't want her. Because every rejection started lingering longer than it should have. It got into my head. It changed the way I moved around her. You can only reach for someone so many times before you start feeling stupid doing it again. The part I never said out loud was how humiliating it felt to keep hearing that it wasn't personal while experiencing it in the most personal way possible. Melissa noticed I was quieter, of course. She noticed everything. But instead of asking what was wrong directly, she got sweeter in these careful little ways. She'd bring me coffee in the morning. She'd ask about my day. She'd curl up beside me on the couch just enough to maintain the appearance of closeness without actually letting it become anything more. It was like she wanted me emotionally settled, just not fully let in. That should have bothered me earlier than it did. Looking back, I think I was too busy trying to preserve my dignity. Around month 4 of this, I started seeing other changes that didn't fit the story she kept giving me. Small things at first. Nothing I could hold up and call proof. Just enough to make me uneasy. She became more protective of her laptop. Melissa worked from home, so her laptop was always around. For years, it had never been a secretive thing. We weren't the kind of couple who checked each other's devices, but there was openness. If mine was closer, she'd use it to look something up. If hers was open, I'd sometimes use it to pull up a recipe or check movie times while she was in the shower. It had never mattered. Then suddenly it mattered. She started closing tabs when I walked by. Not every time, but enough for me to notice. She angled the screen away more often. Once, I came into the living room carrying laundry, and she clicked out of something so fast it almost looked automatic. When she saw me glance over, she gave this little tight smile and said she'd been shopping for something dumb and didn't want me to see it. That explanation worked in the moment. Then it kept bothering me after. Because if it was really dumb, why did she react like I had almost caught her doing something wrong? The same thing started happening with her phone. She didn't become one of those obvious, shady people from bad stories online, constantly hiding it under pillows or taking it into every room like a second heartbeat. It was subtler than that. She just became more aware of where it was, who could see it, and when the screen was visible. More controlled. More edited. At the same time, the not in the mood thing stayed exactly the same. Actually, it got worse. Now even affection felt scheduled. She'd kiss me goodbye in the morning, but quick. Hug me goodnight, but distracted. One night I reached for her in bed and she let out this tired sigh before she could stop herself. She apologized right away, said she didn't mean it like that, but the damage was already done. That one small sound told me more truth than any careful explanation had. For a few days after that, I barely initiated anything at all. I think part of me wanted to see if she'd notice. Or care. She noticed enough to act extra kind. She did not notice enough to change anything. Then came the night that started turning suspicion into something sharper. It was a Tuesday, and she was finishing up work at the dining table while I was on the couch half watching a game and half scrolling my phone. She got up to make tea and left her laptop open. I wasn't trying to snoop. I need that clear. I wasn't leaning over her shoulder all night or waiting for some chance to invade her privacy. But when she walked into the kitchen, a browser window shifted on the screen, and my eyes landed on it before I could look away. It was private browsing. That alone shouldn't have meant much. People use it for stupid stuff all the time. Shopping. Gifts. Random searches they don't want saved. But something about the way she moved when she came back into the room changed me. She looked at the screen first. Then at me. Then she closed the laptop a little faster than normal and asked if I wanted tea too. Again, calm. Smooth. Nothing loud enough to call out. But that was the moment I stopped feeling merely unwanted and started feeling managed. After that, I couldn't unsee it. The distance. The excuses. The carefulness with devices. The way she kept telling me desired self had just faded out of her life while acting like she had something to hide whenever a browser window stayed open too long. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself I was probably being insecure. I told myself private browsing didn't mean anything. I told myself a lot of things that week. Then, a few nights later, Melissa asked me to order dinner from her laptop while she was in the shower. And when I opened the browser, I saw the one thing she must have thought she'd already cleared. Not the full truth. Just enough of her recent search history to make my stomach drop. When I saw those search results, I didn't react right away. I just stared at the screen like maybe my brain had grabbed the wrong meaning first and would correct itself if I gave it a second. It didn't. Melissa had left a handful of recent searches visible in the browser bar dropdown. Not pages open. Not some giant confession. Just enough fragments to ruin the story she had been telling me for months. They were intimate. Specific. Curious in a way that had nothing to do with someone who supposedly had no interest in that part of life anymore. One of them mentioned desire returning. Another was about physical attraction fading in long-term relationships. One was blunt enough that I felt heat rise in my face just reading it, standing there in our kitchen with the takeout app half loaded underneath it. None of those searches proved cheating. I knew that immediately. But they proved something that hit me almost as hard in that moment. She had been thinking about desire. Researching it. Following it. Engaging with it privately. And somehow, through all of that, she had kept looking me in the eye and telling me she was just never in the mood anymore, like the entire subject had gone dead inside her. The shower was still running. I had maybe 10 seconds to decide who I was going to be. I could keep staring. I could click deeper. I could try to open more history, more tabs, more evidence. A big part of me wanted to. But another part of me froze because once you cross that line, you can't uncross it. Whatever I found after that would change the relationship forever, even if the truth turned out smaller than my fear. So I closed the browser, opened the food delivery page like she'd asked, and stood there with one hand on the edge of the counter trying to slow my breathing. When she came back, hair damp and wearing one of my old t-shirts, she looked completely normal. That almost made it worse. She asked if I had ordered yet. I said I was just picking between two places. That was the first lie I told in this story, and it came way later than hers. At dinner, I watched her more closely than I ever had before. Not openly. Not enough for her to notice. But I paid attention to everything. Her face when I brought up anything even remotely physical or romantic in conversation. The way she touched me absent-mindedly, like a habit she no longer felt. The ease with which she slid through the evening, joking about some work drama, asking if I wanted to watch another episode of something, while I sat there feeling like I had accidentally stepped into the wrong life. I kept hearing her old words in my head. I'm just not in the mood anymore. It's not you. I don't really think about it much these days. That last one bothered me most now, because it was so obviously untrue. She had been thinking about it. Maybe not with me in mind, but definitely thinking about it. That changed the shape of my hurt. Before, rejection had felt heavy and sad. Like something was missing and nobody could help it. Now it felt pointed. Not because she had outright said she didn't want me, but because she had hidden the fact that desire itself was still alive enough in her to be private, searchable, and worth protecting. That night, I didn't try anything. I didn't bring it up either. I lay beside her in the dark and listened to her breathing even out while my mind started arranging every weird little thing from the past 4 months into a new pattern. The laptop. The fast close tabs. The private browser. The careful phone angle. The sigh when I touched her in bed. It no longer felt like I was living with someone who had lost interest in intimacy. It felt like I was living with someone who had redirected it somewhere I couldn't see. The next morning, I told myself to calm down. Search history can mean a lot of things. Curiosity. Frustration. Embarrassment. People look things up they never act on. She could have been trying to figure herself out. She could have been confused and ashamed and too closed off to talk to me honestly. None of that would feel good, but it would still be different from betrayal. That was the version I wanted to believe. Then the next few days made it harder. Melissa became even more guarded with her laptop after that night. I don't know if she sensed something had shifted in me, or if she just got sloppier once and corrected hard after. But now she closed it fully whenever she walked away. If she was browsing on the couch and I sat too close, she subtly turned the screen. Once, I came into the bedroom while she was on it, and she shut it so quickly she almost dropped it off her knees. She laughed it off and said she'd been looking at something embarrassing. The word embarrassing stuck with me. Because there are a lot of things people mean by that, and none of them sat well with me anymore. At the same time, nothing changed between us physically. If anything, she became even more unreachable. I kissed her one Friday night after we came back from dinner with friends, and for a second she kissed me back like old times. Then something in her seemed to switch off. She pulled away, smiled tiredly, and said she was exhausted and had too much on her mind. I said okay. But this time I wasn't hearing "I'm tired." I was hearing, "This energy exists. It's just not for you." That thought followed me everywhere after that. I started noticing how selective her body language had become. Around other people, she was warm, animated, quick to laugh. At home with me, she softened into distance. Not hostile. Just absent in a way that made me feel like furniture she appreciated but no longer saw. I also noticed timing. Her mood sometimes improved after long showers with her phone nearby on the sink. Her patience with me was lowest on nights when I tried to be close and highest after quiet stretches when I stayed in my lane. She didn't want intimacy, but she definitely wanted control over the subject of intimacy. She wanted it framed her way, touched only when she chose, explained only in terms that protected her. That realization made me feel angry for the first time. Not explosive angry. Something colder. Because once I stopped seeing myself as the problem to solve, I started seeing how carefully I had been handled. She never said anything harsh enough for me to challenge. Never rejected me in a way that could be called cruel. She kept me just comfortable enough to stay patient while she kept a whole private side of herself hidden. A few days later, I got another piece of it by accident. We were in the living room. She was answering work emails on her phone while I was folding laundry. At one point she set the phone face up on the coffee table and got up to refill her water. A notification lit the screen. I wasn't trying to read it, but it flashed bright enough that I caught a few words before it disappeared. It was from a women's forum email subscription. The subject line said something about keeping desire alive when your relationship feels routine. I just stood there holding one of my t-shirts, staring at the blank screen after it went dark. Routine. That word did something ugly to me. Because for months, I had been killing my self-respect trying not to pressure a woman who kept insisting this had nothing to do with me. Meanwhile, somewhere privately, she had been reading and searching and thinking about desire in the exact context of relationships, attraction, and routine. So no, this wasn't some total shutdown. This wasn't desire disappearing from her life like she wanted me to believe. This was something far more painful. She was having a full private conversation about intimacy that I had been deliberately locked out of. That night, I almost confronted her. I almost asked the question sitting in my throat, if you're so disconnected from desire, why are you spending so much time secretly thinking about it? But I didn't. Because I still didn't know what I was dealing with. There's a big difference between hidden curiosity and hidden betrayal. Both hurt. Both involve dishonesty. But only one blows the relationship apart in a way that can't be walked back from. I needed to know which one this was before I opened that door. So instead of confronting her, I started paying closer attention. I noticed she took her laptop into the bedroom more often now. I noticed that when she worked late, the line between work and private browsing seemed thinner than before. I noticed she had started sleeping with her phone on her side of the bed, face down, screen muted. I noticed that whenever anything intimate came up in a show we were watching, she got weirdly still, like her body recognized the subject before her face could hide it. And then came the moment that ended whatever innocence I still had left about this being random. It was Sunday afternoon. Melissa had gone to meet a friend for coffee and left her laptop on the dining table, open but asleep. I wasn't planning to touch it. Then a message preview lit the screen. Not a full message. Not a name I recognized. Just a line of text that vanished almost immediately. But it contained one phrase I couldn't explain away. It said, "About last night." After I saw that message preview, I stopped telling myself this might just be private curiosity. About last night is not the kind of phrase your brain can gently file away and explain later. It arrives with its own gravity. It pulls every excuse around it into one ugly shape. I didn't touch the laptop right then. That mattered to me for some reason. Maybe because I was still trying to hold on to the last version of myself that believed I could get through this without becoming someone I hated. Maybe because I knew that once I started digging on purpose, I was going to find something, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what that would do to me. So I just stood there at the dining table, staring at the dark screen after the preview vanished, feeling that cold, hollow sensation spread through my chest. About last night. Not work. Not a friend sending a meme. Not some article recommendation or boring subscription email. Something had happened last night. And whatever it was, Melissa was having a private conversation about it with someone whose name I hadn't even gotten to see. When she got home from coffee, I acted normal. That was the start of the investigation. Really. Not the snooping. The acting. Because once you know you're being lied to, normal becomes a strategy. She came in carrying an iced drink and talking about how crowded the cafe had been. She kicked off her shoes, set her bag on the chair, and asked if I wanted to order lunch or just snack through the afternoon. Her tone was easy. Familiar. Calm in the exact way it had always been. And that calm started to feel less like personality and more like insulation. Like she had gotten used to moving through the apartment with secrets tucked neatly underneath ordinary conversations. I watched her while she talked. Not the words. The timing. The comfort. The total absence of guilt in her body. If she was nervous, she hid it well. If she thought I knew something, she gave no sign. That did more damage than panic would have. Panic I could understand. Panic would mean the truth still felt unstable to her. But this looked practiced. Managed. She moved through the day like someone living inside a version of reality she had already committed to. That night, she stayed up later than I did, supposedly finishing work. I went to bed and lay there in the dark, listening to the faint clicking of her keyboard from the dining area. Around midnight, the sound stopped. A few minutes later she slipped into bed beside me, careful and quiet. She smelled like lotion and peppermint tea. She turned away almost immediately. And all I could think was that there was no part of this relationship left untouched by performance. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to stop waiting for the truth to accidentally reveal itself. Not because I wanted to play detective. Because she had already made honesty impossible. At that point, I wasn't choosing between trust and suspicion. I was choosing between ignorance and clarity. So I started paying attention with purpose. First, I focused on timing. Melissa had become predictable in ways she probably thought were subtle. Her guardedness spiked at certain hours. Late evenings. The window after dinner when we used to relax together. Weekend mornings when I was in another room or running errands. She was also more attached to her laptop on nights when she seemed emotionally distant from me in that especially flat way that always used to make me wonder if I had done something wrong. Now I wondered who she had talked to before that mood set in. I also noticed that her phone and laptop seemed connected to each other in a way that kept creating tiny accidental openings. Not enough to expose everything. Just enough to leave traces. A notification here. An email subject there. A synced login that shouldn't still have been active. Once I started seeing those traces, I couldn't stop. 2 days after the message preview, I got another one. Melissa was in the shower again. Her phone was on the bathroom counter, and her laptop was open on the dining table. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the soft ping from the laptop. I didn't rush over. I didn't have to. The apartment was quiet enough that the sound itself felt like a hand pulling me across the room. This time the screen stayed awake long enough for me to see more. It was a message notification from a web-based platform, not regular text. No full thread visible. Just a small preview. The sender name was Ryan. And the message said, "I keep replaying it." That was it. No context. No explanation. Just 4 words that made my stomach drop hard enough that I had to grab the back of a chair. I keep replaying it. By then, 2 things were obvious. First, there was someone. Second, the someone was no longer abstract. It had a name now, even if I didn't know yet whether Ryan was the only name that mattered. I didn't click the notification. I wanted to so badly my hands actually shook. But I didn't. Because even in that moment, something in me said that if I rushed, I'd do it messy. I'd leave traces. I'd learn half of the story and confront her too soon. And Melissa had already proven she was good at staying calm inside half-truths. I needed more than a message preview. I needed the structure of what was happening. That week, I started asking small, harmless questions just to test her. Nothing confrontational. Just references to routine. To where she'd been. To how her day had gone. I asked whether she still talked to the friend she'd had coffee with Sunday. She said yes, casually, without even asking why. I asked how late she'd worked the night before. She gave me a vague answer that didn't really match the timeline in my head. I asked if she wanted to do something together Friday, and she said she might be mentally fried by then and just want a quiet night. A quiet night. That phrase hit differently now. Because quiet in our apartment had started meaning hidden, not peaceful. Friday came, and sure enough, she spent most of the evening with her laptop half-angled away from me, supposedly catching up on tasks. Around 10, she closed it, went to the bathroom, and came back in one of those soft oversized sleep shirts she wore when she wanted the night to end before it had begun. She kissed my cheek, said she was exhausted, and got into bed. About 20 minutes later, after she thought I was asleep, I saw the dim glow of her phone under the blanket. She wasn't scrolling mindlessly. I could tell by the rhythm. Pause. Type. Wait. Type again. That image stayed with me long after the screen went dark. The next break in the story came from something so small I almost missed it. Saturday afternoon, she asked me to print a document for her from her email because her laptop battery was low and she was rushing to get dressed for brunch. I said sure. My voice sounded normal. My chest didn't. She opened her email on the tablet we both used sometimes, pulled up the file, and handed it to me. I sent the document to print. That should have been the end of it. But when I went back to close the window, I saw a folder in her inbox sidebar I had never noticed before. Archived. Again, that by itself meant nothing. Lots of people archive emails. What mattered was that the top visible sender name under recent archived items, just for a second before the screen refreshed, was Ryan. I clicked before I could stop myself. It opened to a thread that wasn't explicit enough to be a confession, which somehow made it worse. The emails were short, careful, and written like 2 people trying to look innocent even inside their own words. References to grabbing drinks. To last week still being on my mind. To not doing this over work chat. To you looked incredible Thursday. Thursday. I knew that Thursday. It was one of the nights Melissa had told me she was too drained to do anything except sit on the couch and decompress. She had barely touched me when I put a blanket over her legs. She had gone to bed early with that same tired expression that had made me feel guilty for wanting closeness from my own girlfriend. And meanwhile, somewhere inside this hidden thread, another man was telling her she looked incredible Thursday. I backed out of the email so fast my pulse thudded in my ears. From the bedroom, I could hear her drawer opening and closing as she got ready. I printed the document, set the tablet down exactly where she'd left it, and stood there in the dining room trying not to let my face turn into something she'd notice immediately. Now I had more than suspicion. Not everything. Not the full timeline. Not a clean confession. But enough to understand the shape. Ryan was real. He was close enough to her life that they used email to avoid being obvious somewhere else. There had been a Thursday that mattered to both of them. There had been a last night. And Melissa had spent months telling me she was never in the mood while quietly feeding some part of herself I was apparently only meant to feel denied by. That afternoon at brunch, I barely heard anything she said. She talked about someone's engagement. About the restaurant being too loud. About whether we should visit my brother next month. I answered when I needed to. Nodded when I had to. All while watching her smile and sip her drink and move through the world like she hadn't been slowly dismantling me in private for months. The worst part wasn't even the possibility that she had cheated physically. It was the humiliation of realizing she had led me believe I was the issue. She had watched me become smaller around her. Quieter. More careful. Less confident. She had seen the confusion every time I reached for her and got some tired, gentle rejection in return. And all that time, instead of telling me the truth or ending things cleanly, she had been building another lane for herself where desire clearly still existed. Just not with me. That night, I finally did what I had been avoiding. I waited until she fell asleep. Then I took the tablet into the living room, opened the email again, and searched Ryan's name. There weren't dozens of messages. Melissa was too careful for that. But there were enough. A lunch that had turned into drinks. A Thursday evening she had called dangerous in the best way. A line from him saying he hadn't stopped thinking about the hotel. I read that line 3 times. The hotel. That was the first moment the room seemed to tilt a little. Because until then, some broken part of me had still been clinging to the idea that this might be flirtation, fantasy, emotional cheating at worst. Ugly, yes. Still maybe survivable in some warped form. But the hotel pulled the truth out of the shadows and pinned it there. My hands were cold. My heart was pounding so hard it actually hurt. And then I saw the message underneath it. Her reply. Short. Careful. Enough. She wrote that she knew they had to be smarter. That was the moment I stopped investigating to find out whether I was being betrayed. And started investigating to understand how long I had been living with it. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the living room with the tablet in my hands and read the same few lines over and over until the words started losing shape. The hotel. Dangerous in the best way. We have to be smarter. That last one stayed with me most. Not because it was the cruelest sentence. Because it was the clearest. It told me this wasn't confusion. It wasn't a one-time slip wrapped in guilt and panic. It wasn't some lonely, blurry emotional thing she didn't know how to stop. Melissa knew exactly what this was. She knew it had crossed lines. She knew it had to be hidden. And instead of ending it, she was thinking about how to protect it better. While I was in the next room. While I was still trying to be patient with a woman who kept telling me she just wasn't in the mood anymore. I remember putting the tablet down on the coffee table very carefully. Like if I moved too fast, something in me would snap in a way I couldn't control. The apartment was dead quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside, the soft creak of the building settling. Normal sounds. Stupidly normal. And that made the whole thing feel even worse. Because nothing around me looked ruined yet. The blanket she liked was still folded over the couch arm. Her mug was in the sink. Her shoes were by the door. My jacket was on the chair. The life I thought I was in was still physically there. It just wasn't real anymore. Around 3 in the morning, I walked into the bedroom and looked at her sleeping. That was the moment that hurt the most, if I'm honest. Not the searches. Not the emails. Not even the hotel line. It was seeing how peaceful she looked. How easily she slept beside the damage. She had spent months making me feel like wanting her was some unfair pressure she couldn't carry, like my confusion was a side effect of being a good man at the wrong time. And all along, she had been protecting not her peace, but her affair. I didn't wake her up then. I could have. A big part of me wanted to yank the blanket back and force the truth into the room right there in the dark. But I already knew enough by that point to understand something important. If I confronted her while I was furious, she would use my anger to hide inside. She would cry, deflect, turn it into privacy, pressure, emotional disconnection, anything except the simple reality of what she had done. So I waited. In the morning, I got up first. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen counter and let the silence build. When Melissa came out, she looked half asleep, hair messy, wearing that same loose t-shirt she always wore on Sundays. She gave me a small smile and asked if I'd made enough coffee for her too. That almost broke me. Not because it was sweet. Because it was so normal. So practiced. So completely detached from the fact that the relationship was already sitting there dead between us. I told her we needed to talk. She stopped moving. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see that whatever version of herself she kept hidden was awake now. She asked what was wrong. I told her I knew about Ryan. There it was again, that moment I had seen in other stories but never really understood until I watched it happen in front of me. That split second where someone's face tries to stay neutral while everything underneath it scrambles. Her eyes changed first. Then her shoulders. Then the whole calm, soft Sunday morning version of her just seemed to pull back a few inches. She asked what I meant. I said his name again. Then I said the hotel. That ended it. She sat down slowly at the table across from me like her legs had gone weak. For a second she didn't say anything at all. No denial. No outrage. No immediate explanation. Just silence. And that silence told me more than any confession could have. Because innocent people reach for the misunderstanding right away. Guilty people go still. Finally, she asked how much I had seen. That was it. Not what are you talking about? Not this isn't what you think. Not even please let me explain at first. How much I had seen. Like the problem was measurement, not betrayal. I told her enough. She started crying almost immediately, but even then it didn't feel clean. The tears came fast, but the words were still controlled. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this far. She said she had been feeling disconnected for a long time. Said she didn't know how to talk to me about it because every conversation about intimacy made her feel pressured and broken. Said Ryan had started as someone easy to talk to. Said it wasn't supposed to become physical. Wasn't supposed to. Another phrase I'll probably never hear the same way again. I let her talk for a while because I wanted to hear if the truth would ever come out on its own. It didn't. What came out was the version of events that made her sound lost instead of disloyal. Overwhelmed instead of dishonest. Confused instead of calculating. So I asked directly. I asked if she slept with him. She covered her face and nodded. Just once at first, she said. Then later it became more than once. Then it turned into some messy half-timeline where the details changed depending on how much shame was in the room at any given second. Drinks after work. Lunch that ran late. A hotel once, then again. Messages in between. All while she kept telling me she wasn't in the mood anymore. I thought hearing the full truth would make me angrier. It didn't. It made me colder. Because by then, the cheating itself almost wasn't the center of it anymore. The center was what she had done to my head while doing it. She had let me carry the full weight of rejection and self-doubt while knowing the real story. She had watched me shrink around her. Watched me become careful. Watched me stop reaching for her. And instead of telling me the truth, she kept handing me these gentle little explanations designed to make me blame timing, stress, hormones, routine, anything except her choices. So I asked her the one thing I actually needed answered. I asked why she kept pretending she had no desire at all. That question hit her harder than the rest. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time all morning, she didn't seem to have a prepared answer. Then she said something I don't think I'll ever fully forget. She said it was easier than saying she didn't want that version of things with me anymore. That was the cleanest truth I got from her. Brutal. Late. But clean. Not that she had lost desire. That she had lost it for us. And instead of facing that honestly, she had built a private life where it could still exist somewhere else. I wish I could say I stayed calm and dignified through all of it. Mostly I did. But there was one moment where I actually laughed, and it sounded ugly even to me. Because suddenly all those careful speeches she'd given me about stress and being disconnected from her body and just not feeling that part of life anymore collapsed into what they really were. Cover. Not confusion. Not healing. Cover. I told her we were done. She cried harder then. Said she still loved me. Said she had never meant to destroy what we had. Said she had been unhappy and selfish and ashamed. Said Ryan didn't mean what our relationship had meant. That one almost made me get up and leave the room, because people always want to grade their betrayal in a way that protects the memory of themselves. I told her none of that changed what she did. Then I told her to pack a bag. She stared at me like she still believed there might be a version of this where I would calm down, where we'd spend a week talking in circles and somehow turn her affair into a complicated conversation about needs and growth and emotional neglect. But there wasn't. She had already spent months choosing. I was just the last person to be told. So she packed. That part was worse than I expected. Not dramatic. Just miserable. The quiet zip of a bag. Drawers opening and closing. Hangers sliding. The sound of someone dismantling a shared life in small practical motions. She tried a few more times while packing. Said we should go to counseling. Said maybe time apart would help us think. Said she knew she had lied, but maybe some part of this had been about how far apart we drifted. I told her drifting and deception were not the same thing. That shut the room down. When she left, she stood by the door for a second with her bag in one hand and her face swollen from crying. I think she wanted me to stop her. Or forgive her a little. Or just give her something softer to carry out than silence. I didn't. After the door closed, the apartment felt huge. Not empty right away. Just exposed. Like all the soft things between us had been stripped out and only the structure was left. I walked into the bedroom and saw the dent in her pillow. I saw her moisturizer on the nightstand, her charger still plugged in, a sweater draped over the chair. Everything looked temporary now, even the things that were still physically there. The next week was mostly logistics. Texts about her stuff. Her keys. When she could come by. She sent longer messages a few times too. Apologies. Explanations. One message said she knew she had damaged me in ways she didn't fully understand until now. That was probably the most honest thing she said after the fact. I kept my replies short. Not to punish her. Because there was nothing left to discuss. Eventually she came by while I was home to pick up the rest of her things. That was the last time I saw her in person. She looked tired. Smaller somehow. Less polished. She asked if there was any chance, even eventually, that we could talk about trying again. I told her no. And I meant it so fully that even she seemed to hear it. Later, I heard through a mutual friend that she and Ryan didn't last very long. That information landed with less satisfaction than I thought it would. By then, I didn't care whether he turned out to be worth it. That was never really the point. The point was that she chose dishonesty over respect for so long that by the time the truth arrived, there was nothing left to save. That's the part I carried with me. Not just that she cheated. That she made me feel undesirable while secretly proving desire was never gone at all. Rejection hurts. Of course it does. But rejection mixed with deception does something worse. It makes you question your own reality. It makes you relive every quiet moment and realize someone else was controlling the meaning while you were just trying to survive it with dignity. For a long time, I thought the most painful line in this story was the hotel. It wasn't. It was what she said at the kitchen table after everything was already dead. It was easier than saying she didn't want that version of things with me anymore. That was the truth she should have told before she let me spend months blaming stress, timing, hormones, and myself. And that's what finally changed something in me. Now, when someone's words and energy stop matching, I don't argue with my gut the way I used to. I don't keep calling it patience when it's really just fear of seeing what's already there. Because sometimes the search history is not the betrayal. It's just the first honest thing you find.